The early morning still seemed to carry a different weight in that small village. The wind blew softer, as if trying to warn of something, and even the animals, restless, seemed to sense that the day would not begin like any other. In the center of this dense silence, the figure of Antonio emerges, a simple man, almost invisible to the hurried eyes of the world, but whose silent presence sustained more lives than he himself imagined. The story surrounding this man does not begin with great deeds, but with a profound conflict, one of those that is not immediately visible, but that corrodes slowly, as if the soul itself carried something too heavy to confess. Antonio was always known for walking every morning along a dirt road that cut through the village. Those who saw him passed by quickly, without noticing that within those slow steps lay a universe of hidden emotions. Dogs followed him, birds perched near him, and even the most skittish cats seemed to find comfort in his presence. It wasn't common to see someone with such a strong connection, and yet no one asked, no one investigated who this man truly was, the one who carried such a particular silence. It was as if he were part of the landscape, part of the routine, part of life, until life decided to claim what had been forgotten. On that particular night, the one preceding the beginning of this story, something changed. It wasn't a commotion, it wasn't a scream, it wasn't a cry for help. It was the opposite. It was silence. A strange, dense silence that seemed to tighten the chest of whoever felt it. The animals were the first to notice. The old dog Baruch, who always slept on Antonio's porch, spent the night restless, barking at the closed door as if trying to warn someone. The birds, which usually sang before sunrise, remained silent. Something was wrong, something very wrong. And this is where the heart of the story begins to beat stronger. Because behind this quietude, there was a pain that didn't yet have a name. A pain that no one saw coming. A pain that even today raises a question that pierces the soul. Why does Antonio's absence hurt even those who cannot speak? What was it about him that made even the most sensitive animals stir? What did they feel before any human could perceive it? And why, on that particular morning, did the entire village seem to breathe as if waiting for news it wasn't yet ready to hear? The conflict involving Antonio is not one that is easily exposed. It's not a drama that's shouted from the rooftops. It's a moving story built on silences, small gestures, weary glances, and failed attempts to hide what weighed on his shoulders. It's real life, naked and raw, with its silent injustices and battles that rarely find an audience. The most curious thing, and perhaps the most painful, is that none of them knew that this morning walk, which always marked the beginning of the day, would be interrupted. None of them imagined that this discreet man was fighting his last battle. None of them understood how much he had already given, without ever asking for anything in return. And while the village awoke with strangeness, while Baruch howled before a door that wouldn't open, and while the birds refrained from singing, something began to unfold, something that would forever change how everyone remembered Antonio. Because before the truth came to light, before the pain was given a name, there was still a moment of hope, a small suspension in the air, the kind that precedes the revelation no one wants to hear, but that everyone must face. And it is precisely at this point that our story begins to deepen. The sun began to rise slowly, tinging the sky with a timid orange, but the light couldn't dispel the strange feeling that hung over the village. People emerged from their homes little by little, realizing that something profound was different. It was as if a void had settled in the air, a void that couldn't be explained, only felt. And, although no one knew exactly what they were about to discover, everyone shared the same silent unease that had gripped the animals since dawn. Baruch, his fur bristling and his eyes anxious, paced back and forth, unable to leave Antonio's closed door. He no longer howled, Now he only emitted a low sound, almost a lament. The cats, which normally roamed the neighborhood walls, were gathered in front of the house, as if awaiting the return of someone important. And the birds. The birds still didn't sing, observing everything with a strange stillness. It was as if all of nature were suspended in a single feeling. Antonio's absence was being felt even before it was understood. Gradually, some neighbors began to notice the animal's unusual movements. Whispers arose, glances exchanged, steps slower, breaths held. No one knew for sure what was happening, but everyone knew that something was about to be revealed. It is in these moments that life shows its truest face, the one that doesn't warn when it's going to change everything, the one that reminds us that no one is as invisible as they seem. And Antonio was about to be remembered in a way he never imagined. And as this story unfolds before your eyes, I want to make an important request to you, the viewer. This channel exists to tell stories that touch, that transform, that make us look at our own lives with more depth. Real, moving stories, full of humanity, like Antonio's, which we are experiencing together now. So, before we move on to the next step in this narrative, I invite you to leave a comment below saying what you would like to change in your life today. It can be something small or big, something personal or public, but write it down. Sometimes, the simple act of putting it out there is the first step towards transformation, and I want to accompany you on this journey of change. If this story has touched your heart in any way, please give it a like, because that helps this message reach more people who need to hear something like this. And if you're not already subscribed, take this opportunity. Subscribe to the channel to continue receiving profound, moving, and transformative stories like the one we're building together. Because, as Antonio silently proved, small presences can change entire worlds. And we still have much to discover about what actually happened that morning. Everyone in the village knew Antonio, but almost no one really knew who he was. He was the kind of man who went unnoticed by most, but who, curiously, was missed when he wasn't around. His routine was simple, almost always the same, marked by small gestures that many ignored, but which, to those who paid attention, revealed an immense soul. Every day before sunrise, he left home in the same worn coat, walking slowly along the dirt road, carrying an old bag of feed that he distributed without haste to the animals that were already waiting for him, as if they were part of his own family. It was a silent ritual, repeated day after day, that seemed to carry an energy that calmed even the wind. And this care, discreet and constant, showed what Jung would call the archetype of the silent caregiver, that being who carries light without fanfare, who sustains the world without asking for recognition. The dogs ran around him, wagging their tails in an almost rhythmic way, as if they had learned to dance to the tranquil rhythm of his walk. The cats, usually wary by nature, approached without fear, rubbing against his legs with a rare affection. Even the birds descended from the branches when he passed, as if they recognized in that solitary figure a presence that offered security, a pause in the chaos of the world. It wasn't magic, it wasn't exaggeration. It was the pure emotional reality he emanated, the same reality that so many people never perceived because they were too busy with their own daily urgencies. And it's interesting how life works, because that same presence that seemed almost invisible in major events became indispensable in the details that truly mattered. Antonio spoke little, very little, but those who observed him closely realized that he said a lot in his silence. His gaze carried a mixture of weariness and tenderness, like someone who had faced more storms than he counted. On cold days, he would bring cardboard boxes for the dogs to sleep warmer. On rainy days, he would leave bowls of food under the balconies so the cats wouldn't get wet. And even when his own body seemed to weaken, he continued. He never complained, never asked for help, never showed the weight he carried inside. The older neighbors commented that he was different, but no one knew exactly why. It was as if life had molded Antonio to be a safe haven for everyone, except for himself. And the more we observe this routine, the more we realize how much the village depended on that silent presence. Not because he made grand speeches or performed heroic acts, but because he maintained the harmony of the place with his constant kindness. He was the kind of person who gave back a little hope to the world every day, even when no one was watching. And perhaps that's why the animals felt him so deeply. They saw the truth that many humans ignored. They perceived what was hidden in his soul, that mixture of strength and fragility that willed to continue even when life seemed too difficult. And now, as we continue through this exciting and true story, it's impossible not to think about how much more Antonio represented than he himself imagined. Before continuing, I want to ask you something special. Leave a comment with a word that describes how you feel when you imagine someone like that. It could be presence, kindness, silence, or any other word that touches your heart. This helps the video reach more people and keeps alive this energy we are building together. Because there's still much more to Antonio's story, and what follows will show why even the animals sensed something before everyone else. In the days leading up to that strange morning, something began to change almost imperceptibly in Antonio's routine. It was so subtle, so silent, that most people didn't notice, but the animals, those guardians of pure instinct, were the first to notice. It all started with a weariness that didn't suit him. Antonio always had slow steps, it's true, but they were calm steps, full of purpose. Now, however, there was a difference. His body seemed heavier than normal, as if every movement required an effort he tried to disguise. A short, muffled cough arose between breaths, and although he always tried to hide it, it betrayed him in the quietest hours, when he thought no one was around. The neighbors, distracted by their tasks, may have noticed the sudden slowness, but didn't pay much attention. It was easy to think it was just the tiredness of a colder day or the consequence of a sleepless night. But the animals knew something was very wrong. The puppy Baruch began to walk closer to Antonio's legs, as if he wanted to protect him from something invisible. The cats began to follow him around the village, observing his every movement with attentive and silent eyes. Even the birds, who normally only accompanied him from afar, now came closer, sometimes perching on the branches in a restless posture, as if waiting for an explanation that no one dared to give. And what's most striking is that Antonio, even realizing his body was failing, said nothing. He didn't complain, didn't ask for help, didn't show fear. He carried that pain with the same discretion with which he had lived his whole life. He was the archetype of the silent martyr, the one who suffers so as not to worry others, the one who guards his own vulnerability as if protecting an ancient secret. His silence was an attempt to spare the world, but in reality it ended up revealing even more about who he really was. Someone who gave himself entirely, even when he had little left to offer. As the days passed, the villagers began to notice differences in the animals before noticing anything in Antonio. Baruch stopped playing with the children and began to follow him, almost glued to his side, as if afraid of losing sight of him. The cats became more needy, seeking his touch with an urgency they had never shown before. The birds sang less, observing more, as if trying to understand the reason for this change that no one verbalized. It was as if all these beings, free from social masks and human filters, sensed at some deep level that this man was becoming exhausted. They felt his energy waning, his brilliance weakening, his presence transforming into something too fragile and precious to be ignored. It was a real and moving image. Antonio walking through the village, his shoulders slightly slumped, his face marked by a weariness that insisted on being hidden, and behind him, or around him, a silent procession of animals that refused to leave him alone. They knew, before anyone else they knew. And that brings a lump to your throat, because there is something profoundly true in that sensitivity that only animals have. That emotional perception that transcends words, that recognizes hidden pains, silent fears, and farewells that haven't even begun yet. While the routine continued, as if nothing were happening, there was a tension in the air, a feeling that this small, simple world was about to crumble. What no one knew, not even Antonio, was that these subtle signs, these almost invisible changes, were the first chapters of something much bigger, something that would change the history of the village forever. And now, before we move on to the next moment of this painful and truthful journey, I want to ask you for an important detail. Comment below with a word that represents what you feel at this point in the story. It could be premonition, caution, or even a painful silence. This helps the video reach more people and keeps our connection alive, because there is still much to reveal about Antonio's journey. The morning that changed everything began without warning. It was one of those days when the sky seemed lower, heavy with a grey that didn't herald rain, but announced something heavier, something the soul feels before it understands. The village awoke slowly, as always, but there was a strange calm that no one could explain. The footsteps that normally echoed along the dirt road didn't appear. The sound of the feed sack swaying didn't ring. Antonio's silent ritual didn't happen. And so, without fanfare, without farewells, without asking anything of anyone, he left. He departed as he lived, in silence. Inside his simple house, tidy in a way that only those who have little but take great care can maintain, Antonio lay as if he had simply rested a little longer. His face was serene, almost too tranquil for someone who had carried so much. There was no expression of pain, no trace of struggle. It was as if, in the last instant, he had found the peace that life had so often denied him. His frail body rested in a stillness that made the heart hesitate, because even the silence seemed to respect that moment. Outside, however, there was a movement that contrasted completely with the serenity inside the house. The animals were gathered. Baruch was the first to notice. The old dog spent the entire night prowling around the door, restless, whimpering, until the lament turned into long, deep howls that tore through the air as if trying to call someone or warn of something the humans hadn't yet noticed. The cats were there too, all gathered in an almost ritualistic way, lined up before the closed door. They didn't meow, they didn't fight amongst themselves. They just stared fixedly at the house, with eyes that seemed to carry a sad understanding. And the birds, those birds that always came down to accompany Antonio's walk, they remained perched on the roof, motionless, like silent sentinels guarding a painful secret. It was this unusual behavior that caught the neighbors' attention. First, a woman passing by to fetch water from the well noticed Baruch's howl and stopped, suspicious. Then another person noticed the bird's strange silence. Soon, small groups began to approach, exchanging worried glances. People looked at each other with a fear that none of them wanted to verbalize. After all, when animals behave like this, when they break their natural routine, it's because something deep has broken in the invisible fabric of life. One of the neighbors, So Jaime, mustered his courage and knocked on the door. He called once, twice, 3 times. No answer. Baruch howled louder, almost desperate, pushing the door with his snout. It was this desperation that made the neighbor realize he couldn't wait any longer. He pushed the door open slowly, his heart racing, feeling the colder air inside. And then, when his eyes adjusted to the dim light coming through the window, he saw Antonio was there, quiet, serene, motionless. The news spread like a lament. There were no screams, no chaos, only a profound shock manifested in murmurs and a kind of sadness that seemed to weigh on the body. People began to approach the house, some with their hands over their mouths, others with teary eyes. And everyone, absolutely everyone, found themselves facing a cruel reality. That simple man, whom many barely noticed, was more important to the village than they imagined. He was an emotional pillar, an invisible point of equilibrium that sustained the harmony of the place. The scene of the animals that morning remained etched in the memory of all who witnessed it. Baruch lay down beside the door, as if guarding his friend's body for the last time. The cats approached slowly, forming a silent circle around the entrance of the house, as if keeping watch. The birds, still motionless on the roof, began to emit small sounds, almost like laments without forming a complete song. It was as if the collective unconscious of that small community was being expressed through them. They didn't just feel. They manifested what we humans didn't yet know how to process, and while the village struggled to figure out how to move forward, there was a strange feeling in the air, a mixture of pain, shock, and emptiness. Something so great had been lost, and only then did everyone realize how much they depended on Antonio's silent presence. Not just the animals, not just a few neighbors, but the entire village. It was as if, in leaving, he had taken with him a part of the place's history, a part of the community's soul. Before we move on to the next chapter of this true and emotional story, I want to invite you to leave a comment describing what you felt during this part of the video. It could be grief, emptiness, injustice, or even, he didn't deserve to leave like this. Comment something, anything that comes from the heart. This helps the video reach more people and keeps the memory of this ongoing narrative alive. The grief that gripped the village didn't begin with the humans, it began with the animals. And that, in itself, said a lot about who Antonio truly was to that place. The day after his silent departure, the atmosphere seemed different, as if nature itself had lowered its volume to respect the moment. The simple house where he lived his entire life now seemed larger, emptier, as if it had lost its center. But those who truly showed the magnitude of this emptiness were those who had always been with him. Those who never needed words to understand him, the animals who truly loved him. Baruch, the old dog who followed Antonio every day, remained seated in front of the closed door since dawn. He stayed there with his body curled up, his gaze fixed as if expecting the door to open at any moment and Antonio to appear with the bag of dog food in his hand and that discreet smile that always brightened the mornings. The dog barely moved. Sometimes he let out a low whimper, almost a plea, almost a question. Other times, he pressed his snout against the wood, as if trying to catch his friend's scent one last time. And each of his gestures carried a pain so pure, so honest, that anyone passing by on the street couldn't ignore it. It was as if he were experiencing a deep grief, a human grief, a grief that only those who love understand. The cats, normally more independent and aloof, also suffered in a way that broke the hearts of the entire community. Everyone knew of Antonio's habit of sitting in the old chair by the door, a simple habit that revealed much about the humble life he led. After his passing, one of the cats, little Tobias, began to sleep in that exact spot, on the worn-out chair seat. He would slowly curl up, as if trying to occupy the space left by the man, as if in that specific point of the house a little of his energy still existed. For hours, the cat remained there motionless with half-closed eyes, as if waiting to feel again the gentle touch of Antonio's hand on his head. It was impossible to look at that scene and not feel a tightness in the chest, a sense of injustice at the loss of someone so essential. And then there were the birds, those birds that always accompanied Antonio on his morning walks, perching on the lowest branches as he passed by, as if they wanted to be close. After his death, something striking happened. They simply stopped singing. For days, absolutely no song echoed through the village. They remained there, perched in the trees around the house, but in complete silence. It was as if they had also entered into mourning, as if they realized that the presence that brought them peace had disappeared. The sound of the morning, that soft, welcoming sound of birds waking up, was replaced by a heavy, almost spiritual silence. And in a way, That silence said more than any words could express. The truth is that each animal reacted in its own way, but they all reacted. They all felt. They all suffered. And this happened because Antonio had unknowingly created deep bonds, emotional ties based on care, constancy, and energy. In depth psychology, Jung speaks extensively about archetypal bonds, about how certain people carry within them a presence capable of calming, nurturing, and balancing others. Antonio was exactly that, an emotional pillar, a silent source of stability. And when someone like that leaves, especially unexpectedly, it's as if the world around them is momentarily disrupted. The animals suffered not only from the physical absence, but from the breakdown of that energy, from the rupture of that archetype of the caregiver he represented. They felt, at deep levels, the end of a cycle, the void left by someone who, without asking for anything, gave everything. And this moment, this collective grief, this living suffering before the simple house, became the most cathartic point in the story. People passing by stopped. Some tried to console Baruch, others watched Tobias sleeping in the chair and wept silently. There were those who looked at the silent birds and understood that in some mysterious way everyone was grieving together. And perhaps that's the most beautiful and at the same time most devastating part of this story, realizing that love, when it's true, leaves marks. Marks that transcend reason, transcend human logic, even transcend the boundaries between species. Antonio may not have left behind material possessions, may not have accumulated great victories, may not have lived a life full of traditional achievements, but he left something much greater. He left behind longing, a longing so profound that even the animals couldn't hide it. Before we move on to the next part of this story, I want to ask you to leave a word in the comments that defines this moment for you. It could be longing, pain, grief. He deserved more, or anything else your heart wants to express. This not only helps the video reach more people, but also keeps alive the memory and energy of this real and moving narrative that is not yet over. As the village began to recover, albeit slowly and painfully, something remained suspended in the air, as if part of the essence of the place had been torn away with Antonio's departure. It was curious to observe how someone so simple, so silent, left such a profound impact, almost invisible to ordinary eyes, but gigantic for those who truly feel the world with their hearts. It was as if, suddenly, everyone realized that each of his gestures, each morning walk, each caring glance had built a legacy that now revealed itself powerfully. A legacy not made of words, but of presence. Not made of promises, but of constancy. Not made of great deeds, but of small actions that, repeated every day, became eternal. People began to whisper memories that had previously seemed insignificant. One woman recalled the day Antonio, noticing she was carrying heavy bags, crossed the street without saying a word and helped her to her front door. Another neighbor remembered the day he left a bag of pet food at the door because he knew the family cat was sick. And someone else commented that Antonio always had a way of sensing other people's sadness, even when no one said anything. He didn't intrude, he didn't ask questions. He simply approached with that welcoming silence that, in some inexplicable way, restored peace. That was how he lived, carrying the weight of other people's worlds without ever revealing the weight of his own. And this type of person, this rare type of soul, usually doesn't see themselves as special. That's the saddest and most beautiful thing at the same time. Antonio didn't do it seeking recognition, he didn't do it for applause, he didn't do it for reward. He did it because it was in his nature, because it made sense to him, because it was his way of existing in the world. Jung would say that Antonio carried within himself the process of individuation, that silent path of being who you truly are, without masks, without external impositions. He lived his essence honestly, and that's why he profoundly impacted those who crossed his path, even without realizing it. And at this point in the story, looking at the void he left behind, a question arises that echoes in the hearts of those who follow this narrative. How many people around us are like Antonio? How many carry silent pain? How many fight daily without asking for anything? How many silently sustain small parts of the world that no one sees? Sometimes we are so focused on our own battles, so caught up in our urgencies, that we forget to look into the eyes of those who are close. We forget to ask if someone is okay. We forget to notice signs of tiredness, pain, need, and Antonio's story, so real and so emotional, serves as a gentle yet profound reminder that no one should carry everything alone. The animals knew. They always knew. They felt Antonio's energy while he was alive, and they felt the disruption of that energy when he was gone. This is something that depth psychology sensitively explains. Connected beings perceive vibrations, perceive presences, perceive changes in the emotional field. Antonio was that field, a source of balance, a silent anchor. And when that anchor was gone, the emotional balance of the village changed completely. But somehow, a hope also remained, a soft light that continued to burn even in his absence, the light of his legacy. And perhaps this is the great reflection of this moment. Eternity is not in grandiose things, but in what we build within people, even without realizing it. Antonio became eternal not because he lived a long life, nor because he did something extraordinary for the world. He became eternal because he touched lives in a way that cannot be erased. He became eternal because his presence became memory, became an example, became transformation. And in every gesture he left behind, there is now a seed for those who had the privilege of knowing him, directly or indirectly. Now I want you, who are listening to me, to do a small exercise. Think of someone who might be silently carrying the weight of the world. Think of someone you know always gives a little more than they receive. Someone who is always there, but never asks for anything. Someone who, in a way, reminds you of Antonio. Think of that person. Feel that presence. And if you want to further strengthen this connection with the story, comment below with a simple but powerful phrase, "I see you." Or if you prefer, write, "Presence matters." These words are not just comments. They are recognition. They are acceptance. They are light. And stay here with me because we're not finished yet. There's still something important to be said, something that springs from this story and connects deeply with our own journey.